Badieri Cameroon. I'd like to pay respect and acknowledge the owners of the land, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I both work and my home is on Gadigal land. So just for a little overview, I will very briefly speak to who I am, what a program you've had. I want to go back and just touch on a few things from the UN Convention from both an Australian and a international perspective. I do want to define accessible tourism and the travel chain. I want to look at some coverage on projections. I want to talk about the road to recovery. And I also want to go back on the lessons that we already know that I don't think will be different coming out of COVID. I want to talk about the reset button and industry cultural change. So who am I and why was I asked to speak? Well, first and foremost, I am a professor at the UTS Business School. I am also somebody that had a major accident, a surfing accident, some 37 years ago. And I went from one day being somebody that was hopeful of having a reasonably successful professional career playing my chosen sport to having very limited movement from the shoulders down. And so I've lived in two worlds. I live in a professional world where I am a professor and I'm somebody with status. And I'm also an NDIS recipient and a person with a disability that is challenged by a whole series of intrapersonal, interpersonal and structural barriers. And unfortunately, many of those still exist in the tourism area, but we're seeing a way forward with some awesome services and products. Now, that picture that's there is of myself and my wife before we were about to go on a hot air ballooning experience in northern Spain, in Girona, about an hour north of Barcelona, with an innovative set of service providers. I was able to enjoy that hot air balloon experience with other tourists without disabilities. And we had a very innovative provider who I was able to get my power wheelchair into the basket, where we then transferred me onto a seat you can see me harnessed in on. Think of it like a Recaro racing car seat. And then it rose to a height that allowed me to see out of the basket like anyone else. And it was an extraordinary experience that finished with a tremendous cultural experience at the end of it and the sociality of being with everybody else. So I'm both at the strategic end, the research end, and the consumer end. And all I want is to see the wonderful experiences that I've had overseas and in Australia become more systematic, engaged. I do want to go back and just very briefly touch on some very important aspects of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. It kicks off with the area of personal mobility. This happens to be me in what's called a trekkie, and this was a guided tour experience from a mainstream tourism provider who also has a business in accessible tourism. And this was me fulfilling a childhood ambition of going into old Rome to see where Julius Caesar came to his end on the Ides of March. And of course, without this form of innovation, service innovation, I would not have been able to experience that. And this is what we want to see. We want to see whether it's for somebody like myself with a mobility disability or others with a hearing impairment, those who are blind or a vision impairment, those who have a cognitive disability, others who have got invisible disabilities like mental health, all have the opportunity to have their disability type thought of and their support needs addressed. And a lot of it is far more simple than this excellent service innovation. Accessibility is an easy word to say, but you need to break it down into its component parts. They are the built environment, the common domain, transportation, and of course, in an increasingly digital world, information communication technologies. So when you and your company think about your offerings, think about those offerings covering those different domains of accessibility. And you need to engage in each of those domains depending on what your service or product offering is. And I will get back to that soon. The other areas of the articles of the UN Convention, I call them live, work, play and travel, and they are covered by work and employment. So you've also got the opportunity, and we know the tourism and hospitality industry are challenged by turnover, to have innovative programs like a new one that's been just kicked off in Australia at Mount Victoria at the Blue Mountains. Talk to the people at Hotel Edico who train and then have work in their business, people with intellectual disability or Down syndrome, who then go out in mainstream employment, meaningful work at market rates. And you will hear of some terrific, loyal staff members who are an asset to those businesses. And we've seen it in other areas like Woolworths and McDonald's and other companies who are able to employ people with some of the lower rates of employment, let alone the rest of us with mobility, vision, hearing, mental health, and of course we know about neurodiversity. The other article that's very important is cultural life. Quite simply, leisure, sport, tourism, the arts, and everything that makes life exciting. The photo that is on the screen is an Auslan after-hours tour of the Art Gallery of New South Wales. They were so far ahead of their time in doing that, I cannot tell you, that was 15 years ago. So what I think some of the key messages coming out, and the simple one around creating enabling environments, and also what I would call expectation management, and that is document your accessibility, make it publicly available, and you will be doing your business a service, people with disability a service, and it will get you thinking about the strengths and the weaknesses of your service and product offerings for a variety of people with disability and areas that you can improve on in the future. And the other component is positive attitudes. My research has consistently shown that those people who have an open mind and embrace disability as an opportunity, and the family and friends that go with them, are the types of individuals that engender a real loyalty for just doing some of the little things. Now, I also want to note that under the Disability Discrimination Act, there is opportunities when things aren't being done right to be challenged. And you don't want to be one of those businesses that's challenged for either brand damage, for what should have been a win-win situation if it was done right in the first place. So this is a picture of the Brisbane Convention Exhibition Centre, and Kevin Cox, now quite a few years ago, just an individual with a disability, saw that the grand entrance wasn't going to be inclusive of people with disability, and we were going to be segregated, people with mobility disability, and asked to enter a long way around from the front entrance. So as a principal, he took a case against that and was successful, and there was changes to the way people with disability were able to come in and leave through the front door like everybody else. This definition, an international colleague and I, who have done a number of jobs with the United Nations World Tourism Organization, recognise that accessible tourism is a form of tourism that involves collaborative processes between stakeholders that enable those of us with disability and access requirements, including those groups I've already mentioned today, to function independently and with equity and dignity. And that's at the heart of the UN Convention as well, through the delivery of universally designed products, services and environments. The definition adopts a whole-of-life approach, and I'll explain that in another way. Any one of you may become a person with a disability, or have a family member becomes a person with a disability through either congenital, being born with that particular disability, or conversely, having a traumatic injury like I did. So the beneficiaries of creating accessible tourism environments are not just people with permanent and temporary disability, but also seniors with access needs who will not want to admit to having a disability, those who are obese, families with young children, and your employees will get to work in a safer and more socially sustainably designed environment. what we know that hasn't changed, and this is Australian research done by the National Visitor Survey over now since 1998, and this pattern has remained consistent. With day trips, people with disability and those without, being blue those with disability, red without, they have about the same rate of day trips as each other, but going to overnight travel, there's a travel gap, and that is almost minus 25% lower rate of travel for people with disability than the non-disabled. So something's happening there. And by the time we get to international travel, there's almost a 50% difference between the rate of people with disability and the non-disabled travel. So what that tells us is there are things that can be done to make overnight travel and international travel better for people with disability. One of the things that you as a business need to understand, and the destination managers should be doing some work on, together with the transport operators and also the holiday planning people, is the travel chain. And that is quite simply every link from the moment you leave home till the moment you return from your trip. And the easier those linkages are, the better it is for people with disability, and the easier it is and the less risk they take in doing so. And the experience are, and this comes from research, I did a quote from one of our interviewees, I just want to do cool things without the hassle. And so those cool things may be like a global event like New Year's Eve in Sydney, and wanting to be able to get from any part of the world to Sydney and use your services and experiences that you have on offer while they're here as well. Good livable communities start at the local level, and if they work at the local level, they will be appealing at the global level. And this is a little map of the area I live in, 18 Kooyong Road, and it shows a blue dotted pathway that I was able to get put in, which is a continuous pathway that goes to my local tavern. Well, surprise, surprise, if I was able to get that continuous pathway in, many others use it. And we also go past a Buddhist temple, a Catholic church, a major convention and exhibition centre, as well as many other things. After this was put in, it just wasn't me, it was families with young children and those other beneficiaries. So when we think about a local taverna or a pub or a hotel, that's part of the hub of what makes that community exciting. We can then see that the travel chain at every point must be accessible. These steps all the way through to, and every dot point is a single step in the travel chain. And if it is not seamless, then I don't get to the experience that I want. In this case, I was getting out on a boat on Magnetic Island and having the most wonderful fishing experience of my life. A wonderful day with a real character called Cliff, who built and operated accessible boats. And it was terrific. Now, that happens at an international level, and you should be thinking about those with access needs and how to make sure that that business buffer, that level of access, that extra profitability that that person with a disability and whoever they travel with wants to spend money with your business. Why you would want to max out the yield that you're getting from those jurisdictional products. This was another experience, a much longer one to put together. This was a mixed ability group getting to the top of Kosciuszko. There were people who were blind, vision impaired, mobility. You can see young children there. And that took a coordinated effort with New South Wales National Parks and Wildlife in order to get this experience to happen. So the message is that we want to welcome everybody. We most often think about, as we've said before, those people with mobility disability, but that's only a very small proportion of the market, and they have a very specific set of access requirements. We want to open it up to those with vision impairment, those with hearing impairment, those with intellectual disability, those with mental health issues, and of course, seniors with access needs. And what we've found is that it's not only an important human rights issue, but as my research has shown, that the access market, which effectively is a group of people that are across all market segments, provide a 20 to 25% buffer on other businesses in your region if you have a degree of universal accessibility or accessibility just for a number of those groups. So you can't be all things to all people all the time, but if you can, and you get the opportunity to design your business and product offerings from the beginning, then there is that opportunity to truly create an accessible and inclusive product offering. I just want to provide just one or two little things to think about as we come out of COVID. So in 2019, I had the extraordinary experience of landing in a helicopter on a glacier in New Zealand. As you can see, that's the team that made it possible. It was my wife and my attendant that travelled with me and the helicopter crew. And that was a can-do set of people that were open to having somebody with a high-level disability get access to a helicopter and then undertake that experience up around Queenstown. So on your road to recovery, I want you to think about a few things so that as we come out of COVID, we have a better experience and not go back to the same position. So on that recovery, I want you to think about hitting the reset button and making sure that everything you do is accessible and inclusive to your product offerings, and that you don't have any fear of asking questions on what you can do to assist people, whether it be the individual themselves that might make an inquiry or their travel party, in making the tourism experience that much better going forward. Right at the moment, I am making this voiceover PowerPoint from a position up at Ballina, and I'm looking out over the wonderful waterways of Ballina in a very accessible cabin with an innovative caravan park company that's got a beautiful accessible cabin, and it's just made life very easy. The information is available. They've thought about this and they've got it across their chain. Reflections. So you've been given, and you've heard from others talk about the UNWTO Inclusive Recovery Guide. You've also got the World Travel and Tourism Council Inclusive and Accessible Travel Guidelines, and this provides you with really good strategic planning information. And that strategic planning information can get you competitive advantage over others, or in a collaborative sense and in a destination management sense, make sure that all offerings available in an area start to become known by others. And so that low cost, no cost marketing that we know can be very successful in the disability space is something that becomes an advantage to you and your fellow service providers within whatever region in Australia it is, so that there's a competitive advantage. How do we bring about a cultural change? We've come a long way. We've got a little bit further to go still. We've got some fantastic precincts, but we want more. We want it to become just standard operating procedure for all parts of the industry. How do we get a better ordinary? So these things aren't special. They're just part of what the industry does, and the excellence that it becomes known for, just as it does with food and wine offerings and the idea of paddock to plate, etc., in a hospitality sense. So no matter what disability, there is a cultural change within the industry that just sees dealing with people with disability and the different types of disability and the different levels of support needs as standard operating practice. And that requires, as I said, right from the beginning, an open attitude, and some would say an empathetic experience of wanting to understand and be responsive to that group of people, whether it be the accommodation sector, attractions, transport, destination management. You become an authentic provider of experience to create memorable offerings for people with disability. And thank you. Please feel free to contact me if there's anything I can do to assist. I'd be very happy to. And I've also provided some extra reading there. Thank you very much. It's been a privilege to talk to you.